Hello and welcome to Marino Bar Review and Marino Bar Tutors July 2024 MEE Bar Exam Predictions Lecture. My name is Michael Marino. I am the third generation in my family to help students prepare for and eventually pass the bar exam, and I'm excited that you, and I'm grateful that you, are spending some of your precious remaining study hours with me. So you're here because you want to know what's on the bar exam, and your first question probably be, why should I listen to this guy? And that's a very good question. Now, you already may have the makings of a solid attorney if you're feeling that way. But to answer that question, my family has been doing this for a very long time. My grandfather, over 75 years ago, created what is basically the modern day bar review course. The same type of course that you took this summer, most likely, where you had a fill in the blank. There was a lecture, you filled in the outline, the fill in the blank in the outlines, and then had a essay test afterwards. I mean, that was basically what my father created before man walked on the moon, and people are still spending thousands of dollars every year. It's a 9-figure industry. To do the same thing that my grandfather was doing, when the world was in black and white. But following in his footsteps, my father also helped students prepare for the exam. Most famously, he got John F. Kennedy Jr. To pass the bar exam after he had failed twice when he had taken Barbary, and then he came to my father and passed. And because of that success, Barbary eventually bought out his course, and my father for many years did their essay program as well as designed and edited their courses. And now I'm here. I run our bar review and bar tutoring business, and having gone through the experience that you have, having grown up around it, believe me, it was a lot of fun as a kid and talking about jurisprudence when I was 4 years old. I was and am very fun at parties, in case you're wondering. But having been around the industry so long, I can say for certainty that it's mostly a scam. Bar review courses don't really help you pass relative to your peers. If everybody's taking the same course, there's no advantage, and the reality is that most people pass in GPA order. The people who did really well in law school are more likely to pass the bar exam than those who didn't do so well. And that's not to say that if you were at the bottom of your class, sorry, there's no point in going forward. It's quite the opposite. I think that what we do at Marino, and for the people in our course watching this, what sets us apart from some of these other courses is that we don't just review the law. That's why it's called bar review, by the way. You're reviewing the law. We don't just review the law. That doesn't help you pass the exam. That doesn't help you score points. What we try to do is teach you specific bar exam skills in order to score points on the exam and ultimately get you to pass. So I'll get off my soapbox and about the industry and really get to why you're here, my predictions on the bar exam. Let me just give a general disclaimer, though, before I really get into the meat of everything. One is I've not seen the bar exam. Believe me, if I had a copy of the exam, I wouldn't be giving away the answers for free online. But I do have a pretty good idea of what the examiners are thinking and how the examiners, what will appear and not just what subjects, but what rules they're going to be attacking within these subjects. And I'm not going to hit everything. There's going to be questions on the exam that I won't get, and some of the stuff I say won't be on the exam, but nothing that I'm going to talk about over the next few minutes will derail what you're doing already. If anything, it should highlight, help, and heighten and shore up anything that maybe you're not familiar with. I think actually the best way to use this lecture is to hear what I have to say and consider, hey, you know what? I wasn't going to study very hard agency, but Professor Marino thinks that agency is something that's likely to be tested, and maybe I'll spend a little bit more time than I would have. And there's only good can come out of that, right? Agency is, like any of these subjects, crosses over across multiple legal areas. So there's no harm in any of this. But again, um, don't only study what I'm talking about here. Don't forget some of the stuff. If I don't think real property necessarily is going to appear on the bar exam essays. It doesn't mean you should just not study property. um, but I think you know that. And before I get started, I will just remind you that if you are in one of the Marino courses or you're working with a Marino bar tutor, it's not too late to add more hours at this point if you feel like you need it. Um, I don't want to give you a sales pitch. I want to really help you here. But if you are not in Marino course and you are unsuccessful in the exam, again, a reminder that what we do is we really focus in on students who have failed the bar exam or are retaking it, who maybe have a baseline legal understanding but need to take that and score points, and while our course and our tutoring, I think, is effective regardless of your GPA ranking or your knowledge or even whether English is your first language. I think our courses are designed to really help you and push you over the top. But enough of the sales pitch, enough of the preamble. Let's get to why you're here, and let's start. So I think the subject that is most likely to appear, and just the subjects I'm going to do in order. It's really in order of most likely to sort of less likely that it'll appear on the bar exam. So I think the most likely thing you're going to see, I would bet on this, is constitutional law. It has not been tested since that COVID exam in 2020, that weird one that happened in October of 2020. And that's a long time, right? I mean, we're talking about 4 years where they haven't tested con law, and con law has been at the heart of a lot of things that are happening in the country. I mean, I was on a plane recently, and there were people talking about Supreme Court decisions, and it really took everything in my power not to interject and correct them. But my students, I adjuncted at a couple law schools, and my students have told me to stop being a know-it-all. So anyway, con law. What will they test in con law? Obviously, the First Amendment is the biggest thing in con law in general. But I'm not so certain that you're going to see that necessarily straight up in an essay. I think more likely, if you were to see a First Amendment issue, the idea of a public forum, different kinds of speech. There was a great essay from California a couple years ago where there was a school district that was trying to curb gang violence. So they said no one can wear red or blue anymore. You'll get in trouble. You'll be labeled a gang member because those were the gang colors, and you'll be suspended without any sort of hearing, whatever. And then some valedictorian who just wearing the color blue one day gets suspended. That's the type of question I could see coming up. It covers a lot of areas of con law and the First Amendment, and you have to understand those levels of scrutiny. How do you going to decide? Because ultimately, we can all agree that there is some sort of legitimate interest the school district has in curbing gang violence, but is this the narrowest possible way to do it, right? Anyway, you study this, you'll get that. I think that's a good thing. Also remember, if they give you an essay like that, to be aware of ripeness, mootness, right? I believe in that essay, the student, by the time the court heard it, had maybe even graduated college. They had not only graduated high school, but were gone beyond that. Or maybe it'll be someone who has a job and actually left the public sector and is now has a big job in the private sector doing better. So that's up for you to decide, what the answer is there. But maybe even more likely than that kind of essay, I think the Dormant Commerce Clause, sovereign immunity, but Dormant Commerce Clause, the way that state and federal laws and powers interact, that's probably the way you're going to see it. I think the type of essay you could see with the Dormant Commerce Clause would be, say, New York controls their railway, right? And they give priority to New York businesses to have space on the railway, and there is a Delaware corporation that sells up in Massachusetts, and they have to use that New York railway for their interstate commerce. is now being hurt by the fact that they can't get priority on that shipping lane. You know, that kind of essay, I think, would be something like you would see. And maybe the facts are a little bit different. Maybe it's not a railway. Maybe it's a highway. I don't know. But I would really pay attention to the Dormant Commerce Clause that way. I think that is something that is beyond ripe and ultimately is likely to be tested. And while we're on the subject of con law, there's been a lot of con law in the news lately, right? The Supreme Court has come down with a lot of decisions that not everybody agrees with. And just know that there's not going to be an essay on presidential immunity, right? I mean, there's not going to be anything like that. There's not going to be a Chevron case. There's not going to be a question of a special counsel. This stuff that's happened in the last year or so is not going to be on the bar exam. They don't test like that. So you don't need to worry or panic that you don't fully understand the most recent Supreme Court decision. That's just not going to be on the bar exam. So again, con law, that's going to be on it. Anything else there to con law that I can think of? The Establishment Clause. Just remember the lemon test. It's not used anymore, so don't mention it. If you're studying off of materials from a couple years ago, it might be in there. You can just scratch that off. But con law is extremely likely. And the other subject that I think is almost 100% guaranteed to be on the exam is family law. I think the last time that was tested was July of 2021. So, well, not quite as long as con law's absence. It's been a while, and that doesn't necessarily mean that just because they haven't tested it, it doesn't mean that it's right. It's due to be tested. Actually, sometimes it means that the bar examiners just find it unimportant and don't want to test it. But I actually think family law, especially with what's happened recently throughout the appellate courts around the country, I think family law is something that you're going to see. And the best part about family law is that there's not a lot of different ways. There's a bunch of different rules, but there's not a lot of different ways they can ask a question. They're not going to be able to trick anybody. I assure you, in your bar studies, if you've seen a family law essay or two, you have seen how they can test you. It's going to be a couple. They're going to be married, and they're going to acquire all sorts of property along the way, and then maybe one of them is going to go quit their job to get a degree, right? So the other one's going to support the family, and then the other one becomes a lawyer or accountant, whatever. They're going to have a kid, and eventually they're going to get divorced, and you're going to have to figure out how they should divvy up those assets. Who has right to what? In the case of the law degree, right? Well, how much spousal support is the other one is supposed to get? It's because they don't have the degree, right? And the other person does. Is that part of this marital property, or is it separate property? Similarly, if there was an inheritance, maybe one of the common ones that they've tested throughout the years is one of the spouses will get a building, right? They'll get an apartment building from an uncle who dies, and they'll inherit it, and they collect rents on it, right? But what will happen in the facts? The other spouse will maybe plant a garden in front of the building, or maybe from time to time help collect the rents. And now the question is, does that make it marital property, or is that separate property? These are the types of issues you'll see. So again, family law, it's not a big subject, right? And there's a lot of rules, but this is one of the ones where I think if you've been in Marino, where we have our study notes, where it just breaks down the rules and that's it. Ditch the whole outline, just memorize those rules. It's pretty cut and dry for most of the part. The part of it that's not cut and dry is custody, right? So make sure you know the UIFSA and the UCCJEA. I had to write that down. The Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction and Enforcement Act and the Uniform Interstate Family Support Act. Make sure you understand the concepts here. Both of them have been tested frequently. If they are to test child custody, I think they'll probably do it in maybe a roundabout way. I've been thinking about this a lot, but I think that the idea of a grandparent suing for custody, trying to get custody, is in the event either that one or other parents are alive or dead. It could be either way. Just remember that for the grandparents to get custody, there has to be both. They have to, the court has to consider it to be in the best interest. So that's always the standard. But the key one with grandparents is that the parents have to be proven to be unfit. Just because a parent is a jerk or works a lot of hours doesn't necessarily make them unfit. But again, That's where you, the future lawyer, has to argue, right? So look it out for the grandparent idea. I think that would be an interesting way that they'd attack. But con law, family law, I feel very, very confident that these subjects are going to appear in an essay, and both of them very likely will be their own one subject essay. But there's other subjects going down that I think are likely to appear that not necessarily will remain as a sole subject essay. They like to test a couple concepts together. And so that's criminal law, criminal procedure, evidence. I think some combination of those three or two of those three are very likely to appear. Criminal law, last tested in February of 22, which makes it, ripe again for the testing. How do they test criminal law? They usually test it in one of the same ways. They like felony murder. Felony murder is the most commonly tested criminal law essay topic, right? Not just the degrees of murder, but specifically felony murder. What kind of essay we see? I mean, the fact pattern that you've probably seen before, where maybe a couple people decide, they come up with a conspiracy to rob a store, maybe someone's house or whatever, a bank, right? And they agree, no guns. We're not going to bring any weapons. We're just going to rob this the old-fashioned way, And then maybe on the way to the robbery, one of them gets cold feet and tries to withdraw from the conspiracy, right? That's a common thing they test. Make sure you understand how you withdraw from the conspiracy properly, because they're going to test you on that. But ultimately, what's going to happen in that convenience store, bank, someone's house? It's going to go wrong. One of the people is going to have a gun, even though they specifically said no guns, right? Someone's going to die. A police officer is going to show up, and maybe the police officer shoots at the bad guy and kills an innocent person, right? And now all of a sudden you have felony murder coming into play. And then maybe one of the conspirators dies. Maybe they shoot the guy. The cop also shoots the guy. And now the person who tried to withdraw is going to be put on trial, not just for the felony murder, but also for the co-participant murder. And there's a lot there, right? You're going to have to go through first explaining, knowing the rules of conspiracy, knowing accomplice liability, knowing felony murder. And then ultimately, finally, and most importantly, don't forget the defenses, right? Duress, insanity, those types of defenses. These are the things that they like to test. So I've gone over a lot of criminal law right now, but this is the essay. I mean, I basically wrote the type of essay, maybe the exact essay you're going to see on the exam, and maybe the crime they commit is not burglary. Maybe they want to do arson or another crime, and that's the variation. But this is the essay you would likely see if you got a criminal law essay. But as I mentioned, they very often will test criminal law with something else, like crim pro or evidence. Criminal procedure is tested very frequently. It was tested in February. That doesn't mean that they won't test it again. I think actually means quite likely that they find it important, would like to test it again. However, if they do test it, I think you're less likely to see a Fourth Amendment like a warrant exception question. Sometimes that'll play into the criminal law aspect, right, where a key piece of evidence is done by some sort of warrant exception. I think you're actually less likely to see that if criminal procedure is not mixed with criminal law and instead mixed with evidence. I think more likely crim pro is the Fifth and Sixth Amendment, the right when the right to counsel attaches. The Miranda rules, is this someone in custody, and then there'll be some sort of confession, right? And you're going to have to decide, did the right to counsel attach at this point? Is this person confession proper? Is it admissible? That I think is very likely. So if I were you, while the Fourth Amendment is 75% of criminal procedure on the bar exam, and certainly on the MBE, it's nearly 3/4 of the questions they ask you. Really, really study that Fifth and Sixth Amendment. Really make sure you have a good concept. And the fact pattern will lend itself to explaining to you what's happening. They'll maybe try and trip you up. Someone will ask for an attorney, and then on their own they'll start speaking again, or maybe it'll be the other way around. They ask for the attorney, and the people tell him, your attorney's not available. I don't know, and then he says, "Oh, I guess, my attorney's not available. I should start speaking again." This is your opportunity to argue this. But the Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments are all of Crim Pro. Specifically, though, the Fifth and Sixth Amendment, I think, is likely to appear on this bar exam. And one way they could test it, and my prediction would be that they would test it with evidence. One great way they like to test evidence is they test a lot of times impeachment, because you have to understand, is it direct? Is it cross? That's one way that they trip a lot of people up. You're so in your head with these rules and hearsay or whatever it is that you don't pay attention to why they're using the statement, just that it is or is not hearsay a lot of times. But in this case, what I would pay attention to is maybe someone makes a confession without the presence of counsel, right? And you determine that it'd be inadmissible, right, to prove their guilt, but maybe it's admissible to impeach that witness. Maybe it's admissible against that co-conspirator. Maybe they didn't die in that previous example I gave. Maybe they're on trial too, and maybe the prosecution wants to use your confession that you were with somebody to impeach somebody else who said that they were not with you, right? To overcome their alibi. This is what you have to pay attention to in the exam, because this is the type of essay they'll ask, because it's not black and white, is it? This is a really gray area, and ultimately what we try and do at Marino, and what you're being tasked to do by the bar exam, is think like a lawyer. And that's what I'm going to ask you to do here is think like a lawyer. So Crim Pro evidence, there's going to be a combination. I've really given you an essay that could go in all three subjects, right? But I think that's the basic idea of fact pattern, and really where I think you should be focusing your time studying when it comes to evidence, Crim Pro, and Crim Law. Though I will say with evidence, hearsay, the way that the Fourth Amendment is most of Crim Pro, hearsay is most of evidence. So you need to know, especially for the MBE, your hearsay exceptions. But I do think that character, prior bad acts, that type of idea, can you issue a prior conviction, is a more likely essay target this time around than just a basic hearsay analysis. So those are those subjects. All of that, I think, very, very likely to appear in the exam. Now we're going to go down a tier. No, actually, I think about one more subject that I think is almost guaranteed, and that's going to be civil procedure. Nobody likes to hear it, but civil procedure is tested on every exam. It was tested on the last exam. It's tested over and over and over again. It's pretty dry when they test it. So while it's very rare that you'd get a sole civil procedure essay, if they do give you one that's just nothing but Civ Pro, they're going to spell it out for you so you'll know what areas are being tested. But most likely to be tested, I think, is going to be some sort of venue question, specifically, about jurisdiction. Does this court have proper subject matter jurisdiction? Do they have personal jurisdiction over the defendant in this case? But is this the proper venue? And then as part of venue, the idea of joinder, there's usually going to be multiple parties, multiple people bringing motions. So know the difference between permissive and necessary joinder in these claims. And that then just leads itself to the idea of collateral estoppel, res judicata. Maybe the court's already handled with one of the people in there and come to their resolution, and that dispute was previously litigated and is not now up for debate, right? So civil procedure, know it. I mean, that's a really lame prediction. I apologize, but again, I think venue, joinder, those jurisdiction issues are most likely to be tested. But civil procedures on every exam, there's no escaping it, no avoiding it. It is Thanos. It is inevitable. And I am sorry to be the bearer of that bad news there. But now we've concluded the parts that I think are almost certainly on the exam. And now we're going to go to what I think is more likely than not to appear in an essay. And the first subject there is torts. Torts or contracts have been tested on pretty much every bar exam as far back as you can tell. One of those two subjects has appeared on the exam. Torts was last tested last July, and contracts was tested in February. I think the more likely subject this time would be torts over contracts. And that's because I think that torts is very likely that they're going to test it in conjunction with agency. Um, uh, and I should say that agency, partnership, and corporations, and which I'll get to in a second, those three are going to appear in some fashion. But I think in this case, be aware of torts and agency together. And when I say torts and agency together, I mean the idea of respondeat superior, the idea of when is an employer responsible for their employees' torts. Usually it's an intentional tort, but it could be a negligence tort if they want to throw in a negligence analysis to it. But maybe even more likely, I think the debate that you're going to have to solve is the question of whether this is an independent contractor versus an employee. They love to test that, and they'll give you the facts if so you can decide what it's going to be. They'll let you know, that this is a painter, but the person who hired the painter says, I want you to use this type of paint, this type of brush, and paint in this area, and use this stroke. Well, now maybe no longer are they just an independent contractor. Maybe you're establishing that level of control over them that would rise it to an employee, and maybe whatever tort they commit, you then would be responsible for. This is the stuff that the bar examiner is going to test. I think it's a lot more likely that you get torts in that fashion with agency than you would just be a straight up negligent slip and fall type of thing. Is this person negligent? If you were to see negligence, I think more likely than seeing negligence, you're going to see like a products liability type of case, where someone is hurt by a product. And I think even with the product, with that, the most likely way you would see that is the best example I can give. This is an old essay, but the concept stands where there's a paper cutter manufacturer, and people like to use the paper cutter, but they remove the safety guard, right, so that they can do it faster. The manufacturer knows about this, and then someone gets hurt, they chop off their finger or whatever. The exact way the safety guard was supposed to stop them, and that's up to you as a lawyer then to just, argue the idea of products liability there. But torts more likely than contracts, I would guess there, and probably going to be mixed with agency. And while I'm on the topic of agency, a strict agency essay doesn't really exist. Agency is always going to be tested with some other subject, but that's the beautiful thing about agency. I like teaching agency a lot in my class because it is part of these other subjects. I mentioned already that it's part of partnership and corporations, and I think if you don't see agency with torts, you will see it with either one of those subjects. And the best way I can give you an idea of understanding how agency and partnership could be tested together, the idea that the essay that I think you would be likely to see is something along the lines of there's a firm. It doesn't matter what the firm does, but there's a firm party, and one of the partners at the firm introduces one of their associates to a client, and then walks away, and then the associate and the client get along great. So the associate hands a business card to the partner. To the client, but they crossed out where it says associate and they wrote in partner. And now the client and the associate are going to enter into some sort of agreement. And the question is that partnership going to be liable on that agreement that they came together? And this is the question of actual versus apparent authority, and understanding those rules. Those types of questions is the partnership going to be bound by the agent, by its own associate? And maybe a lot of times what it'll be before the idea of before the partnership, whether people are liable for contracts entered into by a person prior to joining that partnership. We get a lot of those questions. Some of them are for the benefit of the partnership, some of them are not, right? And this is where you, again, the lawyer, have to now be a lawyer and argue the right way. But also agency sees itself in corporations. A lot of the pre-incorporation stuff, it's you're an agent until there's a proper corporation, and then they become, a shareholder, director, officer, or whatever. So understand agency, understand that part of partnership, understand that it's likely to be part of the torts. But going back to corporations, I think corporations, again, tested recently, but what they tested was with agency partnership. So I think you actually could see corporations on its own as well. I think that's possible too. The big thing they test is that duty of care, duty of loyalty. You have business judgment. That's one side of corporations that I think you need to understand. Specifically, the type of essay that you could see is there could be a corporation that sells hamburgers. Maybe they run a hamburger stand, and then one of the officers or directors comes to the corporation and says, "Hey, we have this opportunity. I have this opportunity to buy a hot dog stand," and they say, "No, we sell hamburgers." So this person goes out on their own and purchases the hot dog stand, runs the hot dog stand, and inevitably the hot dog stand is going to take away profits from the hamburger stand, and now they're going to sue to try and disgorge some profits to get back. And that's up to you again to decide, did they breach that duty of loyalty, and what is the duty of loyalty and care as an officer or director versus just a shareholder, right? I think that kind of corporations essay is very, very likely. And the other topic in corporations that has been tested frequently throughout the country, though I will stress not yet on the UBE, but that just means that it's coming, is the shareholders agreements, and the difference between a direct and derivative action. When I say shareholders agreements, it's a subject that's not discussed a lot in bar review, but one way they like to test these shareholders agreements is two shareholders will agree that they're going to vote for a certain candidate for the board, right? And then they're gonna codify that on their shares themselves, and then one of the shareholders will sell their shares to a third party. And now the question is that third party going to be bound by that agreement that they were not originally a part of, but it is attached to their shares? That's something you're going to have to answer. And then the other side of it is going to be when a director or officer breaches that duty of loyalty, duty of care, whatever, right? Now a shareholder wants to take either a direct versus derivative. So what are the steps they need to take? What's the difference between those two, right? Whether you're suing on behalf of the corporation or you're just suing the corporation itself. That's how you would see corporations in this scenario. So that's basically my predictions for this exam. I've gone through everything from crim to torts to con law and civil procedure, and I think all of this is incredibly likely to appear on the exam. But subjects that I didn't mention: property. I didn't mention a few of the contracts. That's not to say that it's unlikely to appear. Just to say that I'm not predicting that it's going to be on the exam. Doesn't mean you should skip it. By all means, do not skip property, right? Study your property. I'm just not so certain that you're going to see it on an essay in the July 2024 exam. So I hope I didn't waste your time. I hope this was a valuable half hour of your life. I want you to know that if you're in Marino Bar Review, you have all the tools there. We are available for you here. So if you have questions, reach out to us. We're happy to answer them. You have your tutor, your personal bar instructor. So you feel free to reach out to them as well. If you need to add more hours, it's a simple thing to do. You can call our office or send us an email or whatever it is. If you're not in our Marino Bar Review course or part of Marino Bar Tutors, I'll just say real quick. One is, hey, if you pass the exam, congratulations. That's awesome. We do continuing education at Marino. We are the largest Bridge the Gap provider in New York State. We do online across the country in most states. So check us out. We're a family-owned business, so we do appreciate, we're a small business. We appreciate, every client, every customer of ours, every student that we have. You're part of the family, and we thank you. If you're unsuccessful, your life is not over. If you're unsuccessful on the exam, send your score report to us. Let us help you figure out what went wrong and how you can remedy the situation the next time. But I really do want to say to everybody, good luck. You know, you've got this. This is a doable thing, and it may not feel like you're there yet, but I assure you, come exam day, nobody knows everything, but you're going to know enough. And what you need to do is think like a lawyer. Good luck. My name is Mike Marino, and I will see you in court.